A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to visit Belgium with the 11th Infantry Brigade based at Aldershot. I didn't realise at the time, as I hurriedly finished my lunch, during my initial conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Graham, how intense and emotional this trip would be, and that on this trip, I, a Muslim female, would have the honour to lay a wreath at the Menin Gate last post ceremony, which has been observed every day since 1928, except during World War II. Our trip was focused in the area known as the Ypres Salient, and it was here where some of the most intense battles of the First World War took place. The First Battle of Ypres was from October to November 1914. The second battle the following year, from April to May 1915, and the third battle, known as the Battle of Passchendaele, from June to November 1917. The area was seen as strategically important as it represented the final barrier between the German army and the Channel ports. In just 3 days, we visited cemeteries, memorial sites, field hospitals, trenches, and walked along the front line, just to name a few, learning so much about the events which took place. It was only when I sat on the coach journey back home that I was able to start to process what I had seen and learnt. Even with an undergraduate degree in history, I have never felt such deep emotion as I did after our visit to Belgium. We live in a bubble of numbers here, learning dates, number of casualties and factual historical data, but after seeing rows upon rows of headstones, reading names, seeing teddy bears and personal messages from loved ones at the graves, I felt a deep sense of sorrow and love for every single soldier, known or unknown, that died. The realization that despite the fear they would have felt on the battlefield, especially those of our ancestors who arrived in an unknown place, mostly not even able to speak the language, they displayed the truest form of loyalty and bravery. One of these men was Khudadad Khan, who fought during the First Battle of Ypres. The total number of casualties from both sides in this battle alone, which was fought for just over a month, was a staggering 238,000. 11 Victoria Crosses were awarded during the battle, and one of those recipients was the boy Khudadad Khan. Born in 1888 in the Jhelum district of present-day Pakistan, he became the first Indian Muslim VC winner. Although wounded himself, he continued to work his machine gun until all the other 5 men of the machine gun detachment had been killed. His position was eventually overrun by the Germans, and Khudadad Khan was left for dead. However, he managed to crawl back to his lines and was then transferred to the UK to be treated for his wounds. Bedford House was one of the many cemeteries we visited. It was a beautiful sunny afternoon when we arrived at the cemetery, and I remember feeling quite overwhelmed seeing rows upon rows of headstones. Over 5,000 Commonwealth servicemen from World War I are buried or commemorated in the cemetery. We saw the headstones of Jamadar Khan Muhammad and Sepoy Fazl Dad, who died during the First Battle of Ypres, Sepoy Hashmat Ali and Sowr Abdullah Beg from the Second Battle. One of the most emotional memories I have is seeing a mass grave at the Langmark German cemetery. Almost 25,000 soldiers are buried in this grave, with just over 13,000 identified and their names engraved on bronze plaques surrounding the mass grave. It was here we saw original bunkers from the battle, and it is said Hitler visited this cemetery in 1940 during a 2-day visit to the Ypres Salient. It was also interesting to see that the soldiers were generally buried in groups of 8, each group marked with a stone tablet. It's difficult to describe the feeling when we walked along the front line. I tried to imagine what it might have been like and the horrors which would have been witnessed by the soldiers. A place which would have been repeatedly bombed, where bodies of the dead and injured would have been in the hundreds, lying around, and we walked that same place 100 years later. Every evening since 1928, at 8 p.m, buglers sound the last post at Menin Gate. This is one of the memorials to the missing during the war. Being told many men would have walked through this gate, never to return, certainly did bring a tear to the eye. Seeing names upon names on the stones left a mark on my heart. These men would have been someone's son, brother, husband, yet the sad reality of war meant that their bodies were never found. It was an honour to lay a wreath at this service. I would like to end with a couple of verses from a poem written for his Indian soldiers by General Sir James Wilcox, who commanded the Indian Army on the Western Front. It is a lengthy poem telling the tale of Harnam Singh returning home to India after fighting in France. The last two verses read as follows. For India's sons had sealed their oath according to their laws, sealed it with blood across the sea, from Flanders to Gallipoli, on Tigris banks, on Egypt's sands, mid Africa's swamps and hinterlands, and died in England's cause. For ages long the mullahs cry, the temple bells shall wile, and call to prayer for those who died, the father, mother, son and bride, descendants of the loyal brave, who rest in warrior's simple grave, and need no marble pile.